Hi, everybody, and welcome to our tech webinar today. My name is Bert Granches, and I am the Director of Solution Engineering here at Appcelerator. I'm joined with one of our solution architects, Chris Boley, and today we're going to be talking about how to leverage Appcelerator Titanium SDK and the Alloy MVC framework, or Model View Controller framework, to build reusable components in a way that allows you to kind of easily manage a UI library or a components library, and manage that across multiple different applications. We're also going to look at some other strategies on how you can package up your applications for to include these libraries by default, and how themes work with them so that you can restyle these components really easily. There seems to be a lot of interest in our community in how to kind of go with this app factory approach, and we see this with our customers today, and we certainly talk about this with our customers in terms of some best practices. So we're going to break up this tech talk today into a couple of different parts. Chris is going to walk through an example where he's showing off a little bit of a components library that we use in-house, and that will allow us to kind of set a baseline for how we're utilizing this strategy internally. And then we'll do a walkthrough of a code sample that kind of talks and illustrates these same concepts. And this code sample is, of course, going to be available on GitHub right after the tech talk today, so you can go and check it out and see how we're leveraging some of these techniques today. So to get started, Chris, why don't I go ahead and turn control over to you, and you can kind of demonstrate some of the techniques and talk about some of your choices that you made, and kind of working through this components library and how you structured the Alloy widgets, and then we'll look at the code.
Sure. So yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Bert said, I'm going to go through kind of an example application, which is building out a components library that I've been working on. As Bert said, for something that we're using internally. But this concept is something that that's the whole point of this webinar. We want to kind of discuss how we can build out a component library based on reusable UI components, and other components as well that can be then easily themed and really easily used across different applications. So I've got an iPhone simulator and an Android emulator here, and this is running the same code base. So this is just an example app. This kind of home screen is just showing a list of the various different components that I have available. And so a little bit of background to this component library is that we're looking to build out some of the functionality that we have available through Appcelerator Cloud Services. So we're looking at building out components that we can reuse between apps to provide things like user registration, user login, listing out users, all that kind of user management stuff. Then, as you can see here, we've also got a few of the functionality that you can perform against photos. We're working on a similar kind of thing with places as well. We're just kind of building out that component library so we can drag and drop these between projects, theme them, and then we're good to go. So if I quickly go into a bit more detail here. So for example, if I look at the login form that I have here, the way this is built is that we're using UI elements which are defined in one base widget. So we have a UI element for this text field, we have a UI element for these two different buttons. The first button is actually an action button, so when I click on it, it displays a activity spinner and waits for a callback. So if I go back to there again, we can build out this form very easily using these UI components. And actually, there are even components for the kind of grouping here as well. So we have container components, and it just means that the margins and the layout properties are consistent between forms. So, for example, if I then go to the user registration, we've got a slightly more complicated form. We've got more fields here, but we can build out different forms, and they're going to have exactly the same look and feel. Hopefully fairly straightforward. I have the iOS simulator hooked up to Live View, so I can reload this, and I'll apply a theme. And so instead of the red and grey theme, I now have this blue theme. I can colour in the icons, etc., etc. And the nice thing here is that all I'm doing is declaring a theme for the underlying UI components, not for the widgets themselves. So I only have to declare the theme for the base widget, not for the higher level widgets for the login form and for the registration form, which is really nice. So it's a lot easier for me to theme my widget and to theme my widget to go into an application. If I move down a little bit, we have some things around a user list, pretty straightforward really, and then I can go through and get some more details about a user. But then also reusing that form capability that we have for the login and registration forms. Another common thing to do is to upload a photo. So, it doesn't have to apply to maybe just one type of interaction. You can reuse these components to build out multiple different functionalities. So I can click on the Create Photo on Android. Again, you get a very similar look and feel. And again, we're just handling the kind of standard interactions around taking a photo or pulling one in from the library. And I can go through on iOS because we actually have photos in the simulator. So I can pull in an image here. I can give it a title. And create that.
And that's cool. And Chris, I think one of the things that's interesting about this approach is, while you could use global styles to kind of to style, base level elements, what you're doing is you're actually combining multiple different types of elements together to create complex UI objects that are reusable, but stem from kind of a core base library, so that when you make a change to the base library, it's cascading through all of your other subsequent components through that level of inheritance. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's much more eloquently put than I did. Yeah, absolutely. But and actually, one question that we've had from Justin already around how do we base our widget off a base controller? And that's true that you can't actually specify the superclass, if you like, for the base controller. So what I'm doing, so for this is the login widget here. This is the controller for the login widget. What I'm doing here is actually creating a base widget, passing in the arguments that I get when I'm creating my login screen widget, and then extending my controller, or rather extending the base controller with the with my controller. The base controller, I won't go into too much detail, but basically the base controller is defining things like some common functionality. So, for example, I want my widgets to be able to live in isolation in a view, but then I also want to be able to wrap them in a window if I need to, or to apply a back button for iOS. So, for example, if I go into the user view, then this back button is applied in the base widget. So, kind of in the base controller, if you like. So that way, I don't have to repeat that code throughout the widget library.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and it allows for a pretty dynamic way to address certain challenges that you have, where you want to be able to style and theme particular capabilities and components from application to application, but you want to maintain a consistency in terms of your approach to development, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this being able to extend a base widget in that way, could be really, really useful. But then also containing all of those UI components within that base widget mean that we don't have a separate widget for each one of these kind of individual UI components. They all live within the base the base widget, and then, for example, if I look at the widget JSON for my my users widget, I have that as a dependency. And again, I only have one widget for all of my user views, if you like, or my user forms. So, I think that's a good way to structure a components library rather than create individual widgets for every small piece of or every small UI element that you want to be able to reuse.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've seen with some folks in the past, is that they'll create a widget that's very specific for a button. Being able to aggregate a lot of these base components together allows you to make them much more portable, and then you can always add specific elements to a derived widget. Like for your example, I think on your photo, in the photos components that we have, when we're looking at actual querying the photos, you may have like a card that's specific to a photo or something like that. That could be hosted in your photo widget and still derive the majority of the UI components from that base class.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the base class needs to be. You need to look at scoping how you want to reuse your UI elements. There's no point trying to make every kind of base UI element fulfill all the different types of functionality that you might have for it. So absolutely, you need to specialize as you go up, kind of up the stack, if you like. So in your actual kind of the final widget that you would implement in your, or rather use in your project, that's where your most specialized work needs to take place. There's no point trying to put everything in the base widget and bloat it out with things that you might only be using in one widget above that.
Got it. Well, that's awesome work, and really appreciate you focusing on that internally for us. This is something that we may be looking at more heavily for our community as well, but there's no dates or promises set for that at this time. But it is something that we can certainly talk more about if people are interested in it in an upcoming Tech Talk. So I've actually put together a quick sample that we can walk through in a little bit more detail. It's a much smaller library than what Chris has put together, but I hope that it illustrates some of the key features that Chris was talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and let's see here, get that up and running. And what I've done is kind of taken the concepts that Chris was just talking about and put them into a simplified application that demonstrates the key techniques that we were just discussing. This is something that will be freely available on the Appcelerator SE GitHub repository, and you'll be able to access it directly following this particular tech webinar. So what I've gone ahead and done here, and we'll look at a couple of different examples, but I'll go ahead and build out for iOS while I'm discussing this, and I'll go ahead and make sure that we have live view turned on so we can see some of the changes in real time. So I've created two widgets. One is a base components widget, and this is has several different controllers and views within inside of it. Mainly we're looking at a text field, an icon, which is a label-based font icon for creating high-quality cross-platform applications or cross-platform UI for some of the iconic representation that you may have in a form or within your application. And then we have a button, which is just a styled button. This is going to help us kind of derive the next item up on the dependency chain, which would be the login component. So as the iPhone simulator boots up here, we'll see that we've kind of generated a form that's similar to what Chris was showcasing earlier. We have two text fields, each with an icon embedded within it. This is a label that's been added to the text field. And then we have two styled buttons here. Now, if we take a quick look at the code for how we're including those widgets within our login form, we can actually open up our widget.xml for the login form. And I'll zoom in here so we can take a quick look. We'll see how we're referencing those components. And we're going to do this primarily all in the XML for this particular demonstration. As Chris mentioned, you could pull in the component and extend your class from it through the JavaScript itself, but we're just going to access those components directly in the XML. Here we have our widget tag, which is used to quickly get access to a widget from within the declared XML. We're referencing our base component library, and we're specifying a name, and this allows us to actually pull a specific view from a widget. So as Chris was talking about earlier, if you have a component's widget that has multiple different types of elements within it, you can specify a particular view that you want to access by utilizing the name field here. I'm going to go ahead and give this an ID of username for this particular widget, and then this icon is a custom attribute, and this is representing something that I want to pass into that particular type of element. And we'll see how we handle this in just a second. But again, this makes it really easy for me to standardize as a team member on a development team or within my own projects on a particular type of element that I can then extend or make changes to from a theme perspective and have that cascade through my entire UI that I specify. So really quickly, that's how you can add a widget to your actual form within an Alloy application. Now if I go ahead and zoom back out here. Oh. Now it's going to zoom me back in. Whoa. Wrong way there. Okay. That looks a little better. So now we can see, how that's going to get represented. So this is how we're declaring this particular form. We're using our base level components, and if I open up our text field, for example, you can see that all we're having to do is within our text field is reference a single text field entry within the Alloy tags, and we're setting the auto style to true. This is because we're taking advantage of dynamic styling in Alloy. We'll see how that works in a second. And then if I open up the controller file for this text field, we can see that we are passing in arguments. So as we are looking at the, let me go ahead and drag this over here. And open up the widgets. As we are passing in ID properties, icon properties, and attributes for these XML tags, we can then take those as arguments into our widget directly. And in this case, what we're referencing here is args.icon. And what we want to make happen is we do pass an icon to this text field. We want to ensure that this icon gets added in appropriately. Now again, we're going to leverage our base component library. And then we're going to reference the icon element that we have within our components library. And you can see that we're using the alloy.create widget. So we're, again, referencing, but in a programmatic way, creating something from that base level component that we can then add to our text field here. Again, we're changing, in this particular case, the classes associated with this text field to account for the icon so that we get proper padding here. As you can see, if I start to add text into this particular field, it's going to be padded appropriately for that icon. I can, to give you an example of what happens if we take the icon away, I can come over here and just simply delete that icon and resave. And as our application updates, you'll see that the padding is actually shifted over a little bit to the left versus what we see in the text field below. And that's part of that dynamic style that we're talking about that we can use with Alloy when we add a class that's referenced from an actual TSS file within our base components library for the text field itself. You can see that we've predefined that class, and we can add and remove classes to an element dynamically utilizing dynamic styles. So this is one way, as Chris mentioned, how you can start to extend these types of widgets and leverage them in a subsequent derived widget within your application and start to build a components library that is reusable. Now, as Chris also talked about, what makes this inherently valuable is you don't have to go into each and every widget and change up the styles when you want to have a new look and feel. So for example, I've gone ahead and created a custom theme here, and as Chris was talking about, we can go and just change the base core theme or the base components, and you can see that we're referencing only the components com.accelerator components widget here. We're not referencing the login widget. And if I come into our config.json and under global theme, and save, the changes that we made to the com.accelerator.components styles here. So for example, if we open up the button TSS, we can see that we're changing the background color, changing a little bit the widths and the color of the text in order to achieve a different type of result. We've also made changes to the styles for the text field, etc. But I didn't have to go in and alter my login form. Now, where this becomes really, really powerful is as you start to create these derived components. I may have photo objects. I may have a shopping cart. I may have a form browser for a back-end CRM system. That entire look and feel of that application would change because all of those subsequent components or widgets that you're building would be based off of this core component library, and thus it's very simple to go in and you can make changes right away. If you're doing work with many different customers and you're leveraging a standard components library, those customers can still get a very high quality customized look and feel based on their desired color schemes and what matches the application. Adding shadows to views and buttons and things of that nature, all of that can happen in the same manner, and you can really increase the speed at which you can develop those types of applications. If you're building for applications internally, you can re-leverage these login widgets and you can change the look and feel. You can create different themes for iOS versus Android, for example, to conform with those types of device patterns and UI guidelines. And all of that can be done in a very simple approach. Now, the last thing I wanted to quickly showcase here, and where this really starts to make it worthwhile from a team perspective, is within Accelerator Studio, it's great to be able to take these concepts and create a template and a sample that can be shared amongst a team. So, for example, when you're adding in or creating a new project, you don't necessarily want to have to go and create a project and then go to your source control, drag in all these different widgets, and then set up the dependencies. If we look at the config.json, you'll also notice that these dependencies are added in. We add these dependencies into the config.json so that the Alloy compiler can pick up on these in a real-time way at compile time and notify you if you're missing any one of these dependencies. Subsequently, that works well for the widgets that we see in the widget.json as well. And this is what Chris was talking about just a little bit earlier, in that if I tried to install the components.login widget, but I didn't have the base level components library, I'd receive an error at compile time to let me know that. And you can get around a lot of this by actually creating your own templates and samples that can be reused in Studio. as a quick example, I've gone ahead and taken this core project and made it a sample application. This is something that we have documented within docs.appcelerator.com on how to create samples that you can add or your own templates to Studio. Here we have a components library, and now all I have to do is say, if I'm getting ready to build a new project, I can import a sample or create a new template. We're going to pop up the new components or the new sample project application dialog, and it's actually going to pull from source control a project into Studio. Connect it to the services that I need, and you can see right away that in this particular new project, I have an Alloy application, and when I open up the app, I have my widgets predefined. I have my themes already pre-installed in this application, so that I can ensure, again, that I'm starting from the proper place with the latest code from our source control, and have all the necessary widgets and components I need to get started building this application right away. It's a simple technique that you can use, but it can really help when you're working with a team to make sure that you're building in the most efficient manner and utilizing the latest code that you have. So that's all that we have in terms of presenting today. I hope this has been helpful in looking at it from an app factory type of approach, how you can build component libraries that are reusable and stylable to improve the overall look and feel of your applications as well as the speed that you can develop. And at this time, I think we'll see if there's any more questions that we can help address here. So I think we addressed one question that we had around how you can inherit topics. I'll quickly review that for those that may have joined the call a little late. So as we've talked about throughout the course of the presentation today, widgets can be inheritable just like common JS modules or standard JavaScript classes. You can extend a core base component library to additional dependencies for your follow-up widgets or your derived widgets, so that you have your core base elements that are representing the core UI for your entire application. This can be done either programmatically at the JavaScript layer, but you can also leverage those widgets directly within the XML, as we looked at earlier. One of the other questions that we see here today is around widgets and list views, and are we planning on enabling widgets to be used in list views, and could they return a template item? So the list view is one of our table view representations, and currently they do not support widgets within the XML. However, that is something that we are looking at updating with a future release of Alloy. I don't have a date for that yet, but it is something that should be coming in the near future. Today, you can use requires for your item templates, so you can break out those templates directly in your application. They just can't be in a widget. It would just need to be in a top-level view in your application. So I think that's all the time we have for today. I hope this has been a very helpful talk. And please check out the polls that we have. We'd love to hear about what topics you'd like to see next time around. Chris, I'd like to thank you for, again, doing some great work and helping us out with the Tech Talk today.
No problem. Thanks, Bert. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for your time.